Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the fourth webinar in Alexandra Palace's Culture Bubble webinar series, Culture Bubble Scene Change. First off, I have to apologise that due to some scheduling and technical issues, we are unable to provide closed captions live for this session. We are recording the session and we will ensure that captions are available on the recorded version. I am really sorry and I can only apologise if you were hoping to use the captioning with us this morning. These webinars are a space for young people to discuss and explore activism, creative careers, and gain advice from industry professionals such as those joining us today. You can watch the first 3 webinars through the links on Alexandra Palace's website in the Creative Learning section. Scene Change brings together a panel of female backstage professionals to discuss the changing face of the production industry. You'll hear from leading luminaries in the fields of lighting, sound, and venue crew who'll talk about their experiences breaking into the sector, the challenges they've faced, and what venues and individuals can do to foster a more inclusive workforce. So I'm Katja, I'm one of your co-hosts today. I'm a lighting designer who works mainly in theatre. I've lit shows at venues like Theatre 503, the Vault Festival, and the Soho Theatre, and I've also assisted on shows at the Hampstead Theatre and most recently the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. I've also worked professionally as a technician for Underbelly at the Edinburgh Fringe and in Leicester Square, and I'll hand over to Amy, our other host today.
Thanks, Katja. So yes, as it was just said, my name's Amy and I'm a freelance theatre technician with a focus on lighting, but I'm also a bit of an all-rounder. So I do sound and I do video and I do stage and whatever else is expected of me at the venues that I work at. Currently, my main sort of thing, my main focus is that I'm the technical manager at Camden People's Theatre, which is a 60-seat theatre in Camden, unsurprisingly, which stages work by early career artists, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds in the arts. But I've also worked across lots of other London theatres as a technician and on tours and at Fringe festivals in Brighton and Edinburgh. I've also worked as a stage manager, production manager, operator, etc. And I've done a little bit of lighting design in my time as well. I actually studied English at university, so nothing to do with production. But I did do a study abroad program in New York, which is where I got the opportunity to study production. Well, not study, to experience production. But yes, I don't have a degree in production or design, which is something I think we will talk about a bit later. So in terms of the panel, I pitched this panel to Jen, who is Ali Pali's creative learning producer, back in April, after joining another webinar about art and activism in sort of contemporary theatre. And we were lucky enough to sort of get funding from Ali Pali to put on the webinar as the next one in the Culture Bubble series. And just to give you a little bit of background about the creative network that has made this possible, it's essentially it aims to reach young people primarily aged 16 to 24 who are interested in pursuing a creative career. And as well as putting on regular webinars like this one, hearing from creative industry professionals, we also offer activities including creative workshops, volunteering and work experience opportunities, as well as events for young people to showcase creative talent. And if you want more information about what the Creative Network does, please do get in contact with Jen. And you can do so by emailing creativenetwork@alexandrapalace.com. And I'm sure there's a way that we can share that email address after the panel in case you didn't get it. So let's move on to introduce our 4 amazing panelists. But before I do, this webinar is going to be recorded. I'm not sure if Katja said already. And hopefully we'll have closed captions on that recording. And if you've got questions as we go along, please do just drop them in the chat and we will answer them as we go, wherever they feel most relevant or whenever they come through. And you can do that by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully you can see that. So hopefully that will make sense. Let's get started. So we're going to introduce all 4 of our lovely panelists, and we're going to start with Berta. So Berta is from Barcelona and is a technician and lighting designer based in London, has been doing this for the past 5 years. Berta graduated from University in San Francisco and has worked as a programmer with a Tony awarded lighting designer, a Tony nominee lighting designer, and has done loads and loads of stuff. Then Berta moved to London, where she graduated from an MA Performance Design and Practice at Central St Martin's, University of London, and has since worked at the Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance for over 2 years as a designer and technician, where she collaborated with choreographers, a long list of choreographers. And her most recent credits include the Brownie Club at Jackson's Lane, Withered Optimism at Volts Festival, Becoming Berenice at Voila Festival, and Maps with Pivot Dance. Wow. So I'm going to hand over quickly to Berta to say a quick hello and to talk a little bit more. Over to you.
Hi. I came to London and I did a lot of stuff. And before that, I was in San Francisco, where I did the programming and I worked with all these great, amazing people. And yeah, I do mostly lighting, but because of my background, I know a lot of sound and AV, and so sometimes I get asked to do some of the stuff. But yeah, mostly sound lighting design in Fringe and mid-scale. And I've done quite a lot of touring as well. It's just come up. And then after, well, the pandemic happened, so everything stopped. And I started working at Bernie Grant Center, which works, it's a venue that works towards a more diverse, not only backstage, but also promoting Black artists and Black community in Tottenham. So that's been also a great project to be involved in. I think that's it.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Berta. Next up is Anna Field. Anna has worked in technical theatre since she left university. She started her career as a lighting technician, but soon realised that her talents were better used in stage and props. She's worked for the Royal Shakespeare Company, Glyndebourne Opera House, and the Royal Opera House Muscat in Oman, to name a few, which is very impressive. Very often she's been either the only woman or one of a minority of women on a team. Eventually she rose to the heady heights of being a production manager and senior carpenter, and did this role for 5 years. And since the pandemic, she's been working for the events department at Belvoir Castle. She lives with her partner Tim and their cat Worcester in North Leicestershire. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do? Thank you.
So I started off working in props around about university, a little bit beforehand. I managed to break into the industry just by being persistent. I was lucky. I grew up in Stratford, so I had this huge resource in the town where I lived, and I basically turned up every week, the same day, same time, until somebody caved in and gave me a job just to make me shut up. So from then I was lucky enough to be promoted up through the ranks and went on tour with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I ended up being there until 2008. Then when they closed all the theatres for their huge refurb, I ended up going to Glyndebourne. Now, I was the first female technician to be employed there in their 75-year history. So that was interesting, me and 39 men who'd never worked with a woman before. So yeah, that was interesting. And then, yes, we moved abroad and I became stage crew out in Oman, working with an incredibly diverse team, Omanis, Indians, people from the Punjab, people from Spain, Australia. It was an amazing crew to work with. And then we came back to England, where, as you said, I became a production manager and senior carpenter. So I went from pushing pieces of scenery to building pieces of scenery. And that was a trial by fire. I learned very much very quickly. And yeah, since the pandemic, I started volunteering over at Belvoir Castle, and then ended up being given a job by the Duchess of Rutland, which is very nice. And I now work on their events team. So I do events and weddings, which is completely different, absolutely bonkers. And yeah, so watch this space.
Great, thanks, Anna. Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. So next up we have Abby. Abby is a freelance theatre technician, stage manager and laserist, which is very exciting. And we're very, very privileged to have such a cool and specific skill on this panel today. And I think Abby will probably talk a little bit more about it, but started doing more laser work during the pandemic and lockdowns. But Abby originally studied and worked in software engineering before having a career change to technical theatre, and has since worked on Fringe to West End and Legoland in lots of different roles. Abby, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Amy, for the intro. So yeah, I study like math and computer science in uni, and then went on following that until I got into London, started working in London, and I just like went and worked in theatre all the time. And so I decided to give it a change. I started in Edinburgh Fringe, like a lot of us did. And that's when I discovered technical theatre, and I just love doing everything. So I'm doing a bit of like light, sound, stage management more recently, because there's more job I can take on in terms of different skills. But yeah, over lockdown, the best thing I managed to do is do some laser installation work on a show called Laser Light City, where we just rig laser on rooftop and audience get to control it. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on, a bit laser, a bit more theatre operating anywhere I go.
Amazing, thank you, Abby. That is so unbelievably cool. It sounds very fun. And finally, we have Lucy, who is the head of audio for Anna Valley, and who has recently been involved in projects for YouTube, Spotify, Sotheby's, and Sky. Prior to this, Lucy freelanced as a technical project manager and audio engineer, and has worked across theatre, music, and live events for over 10 years. Welcome, Lucy.
Thanks for having me. So I grew up in a really small seaside town in the north, but we were lucky enough to have the Stephen Joseph Theatre on our doorstep, who is where Alan Ayckbourn premieres most of his work. So I was really privileged, and so I just ended up working there from a young age as an usher, and then being involved in their youth theatre, and that's how I got into doing backstage stuff. And then I went to Guildford School of Acting and did that for a couple of years. And then took a slightly divergent move and worked for a hire company rather than going in and doing immediately freelancing. So I worked for Orbital Sound and then for SSE, and then I went freelance. So I've done two sides of the coin, I guess, and I've seen productions from both a hire company perspective and also from a freelancer perspective. And then I got roped into joining Anna Valley, who are more of an events TV company, and we do some weird and wonderful projects all over the world. So that's where I am now, as head of sound.
Great, thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for introducing yourselves. And yeah, we're going to go straight into the discussion now. I think we've all suitably introduced ourselves. So as I said before, please feel free to drop any questions, such thoughts you might have in the chat, and we will pick them up as we go. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Please ask anything that comes into your mind and share with us your thoughts as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be questions that we can answer. Also, we'd really appreciate any thoughts that you might have as sort of young people or people who are early career or thinking about getting into this area of work. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. So we've sort of got the discussion is sort of split into three rough parts. We're going to start by talking about sort of like pathways into the industry, and sort of like how we got into the industry, and sort of what we think, talking a little bit about like the visibility of backstage roles and sort of backstage careers, as opposed to the more sort of obvious roles, professions of like acting, directing, the things that are much more visible. Like when you go to the theatre, you see actors, you don't necessarily see the people who are running around and hiding away and doing all the things, pressing all the buttons. So we thought we'd start off by sort of opening it up and seeing, essentially the question is, there's two options to this question. So if you were involved in theatre, drama, performance growing up, as some of us were, what did you know about like backstage roles and production? Was it visible or something that you had no understanding of? Were you ever encouraged to think of pursuits outside of performance and acting? And if your starting point in theatre was backstage, so you do have a sort of a grounding in backstage roles, how did you first find out about that? And I think some people have touched on it already, but it would be really good to sort of hear more about that. and the opportunities that people had to learn about these areas that aren't the most obvious career choices. That's enough from me. Feel free to jump in, anyone.
I'll jump in. So I think this has been in my career something that I've been finding out a lot, meeting people, and they come from very different backgrounds. And it's very interesting how they came about the backstage side of it. In my country, theater, it's very elitist. It's for very specific people. And I was lucky enough that my parents took me to the theater. And when I was young, I was involved because I love theater, but I was involved in acting, like summer school and things like that. Never took it seriously. High school offered classes. We had dance and theater. So I was like, why not? And then we started working. There was offering a workshop of audiovisual, and that meant recording those performances that we were doing. And that's when I started a bit of the backstage, but I didn't really fully. It was more like on a cinema background. So when I went to the States to study cinema, and suddenly I discovered theater there, because I was so convinced that I was going to be a camera operator. And then I started working on a lighting desk, got involved in the theater department there. And then I met people who were studying theater background, and I didn't know backstage, and I didn't know that that was something that you could even do. And then talking to them, they were like, oh yeah, when I was in high school, I was already flying all these bars, and we had this theater and we had these things. And I was like, what? You had a high school with a theater inside? Like, what? And then so many people had already been doing that since they were like, I don't know, 13, 14. And I was like, what, how? Our theaters are so small, and they're so, and there's like small theaters and there's the National Theater, but nobody's involved in that. It's such a hidden thing. So coming here, and I feel like in London or in England, it's a bit of an in-between. There's a lot more theaters available, and there's a lot of like smaller theaters and fringe theaters that people can get involved. But I haven't known people to be involved that young as they were in California. And I think for me, it was more like, yes, I love theater. I didn't like acting. Well, I didn't care about acting, but I was like average. I wasn't like an amazing actor. So realizing that that's what I wanted to do, suddenly being like, oh my God, this exists. I can do this. It was like opening a door, and I wish it had been available earlier, and I wish that it had been more promoted when I was younger. And that was because we talk about the backstage. Everybody knows in cinema there's cameras and there's lighting and there's all of that, but theater, live performances, concerts, all of that, it was I wish we had a school in our high school of full-on theater that I could have just tried things out, basically. So yeah, that was my path.
I think for me, I did backstage from a really young age. I think I stage managed my first show when I was 12. But it was a sanctuary for me, the theatre, because I grew up in this town that really didn't have any opportunities. There wasn't any diversity growing up in a seaside town in the north. So the theatre really was a place where I got to meet new people from loads of different walks of life, where everybody was welcome, and there was no you could be whoever you wanted to be and nobody questioned it. And I was lucky enough that there was a really fantastic stage manager who was working at the theatre towards the end of her career, and I was useless at acting. So my theatre group, I was terrible at it, but she saw something in me that was more sort of organizational, and I was always the one who was, sorting people out with whatever they needed. So I think I took a shine to her, and she took me under her wing a bit, and I was just very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. So yeah, youth theatre was how
similar to Lucy's. Yeah, my story is similar to yours. So I started being dragged to amateur theatre rehearsals with my parents from a young age, realised that I was terrible at acting. I'm more hammy than a ham sandwich. I was absolutely terrible. But I had that organisational thing where I was sorting out people's problems and costumes and things they didn't even know they were doing wrong before they'd even stepped out on stage. And that was that little spark at about 15 or 16 that I realised that there might have been a career that I could follow. So yeah, it's really interesting how we've all sort of fallen into it by different ways, but we found the slots that suit us the best.
It certainly wasn't something that school ever told me about. It was something that was actually really, especially the like backstage side, was something that school were quite negative about. That's something that the boys do. You don't want to do sound and lighting or stage management. That's what the boys do.
Absolutely, yeah. Girls do costume and makeup, and they look pretty out the front. What on earth do they want to wear big boots and be lumping heavy kit around for?
Yeah, why don't you try textiles?
Yeah, because I'm terrible at it.
What's really funny for me, just to jump on the thing about like at school, is that when I was doing my sort of GCSEs and A levels, and my school had like quite a lot of theatre, a lot of music, like I was involved with it all. I also started in sort of like performance and dance and singing and stuff, is that I was friends with the people who did the tech for shows. So like I had as much of a access, a pathway into this sort of world as one could have at school. But even despite that, it was always something that someone else was responsible for. Like I never went in the tech box, like I never had access to this world. It was just this like, yeah, it was just so sort of secret and remote. And I just think that's so interesting that it like took so long for me, even though I was exposed to it from, you know, a relatively young age. It still took years and years for me to actually be like, oh yeah, this is like an option for me to do as a job, which is just mad, isn't it?
What hooked you? What took you from not looking at it as a career to going, actually, maybe I'll go and do this?
Well, it was so, like I said, I studied English, but I went on a year abroad, and I, at the last minute, basically was given the opportunity to take whichever classes I wanted rather than sticking to like English literature classes. So I took some sort of like wacky wild, you know, I took like an improv class, I took a playwriting class, and I took a production class. So this was the first time I'd ever really had any like real insight into anything that wasn't sort of like front of stage, front of house. And at the same time, I also got involved with productions in the theatre department and student sort of theatre productions, which was more because I didn't really know anyone on my year abroad. So I was quite lonely. I'd like went out not knowing anyone. So it was just like a way of making friends. And obviously, like, it's such a cliche, but the sort of friendships formed in theatres are like, you know, they're lifelong friendships, because you sort of, it's such a unique, you know, thrown together in such a sort of chaotic and crazy and stressful environment that you can't help but like get to know people in quite a special way. So it was that mostly. It was just by like the sheer chance of looking down a list of classes and being like, yeah, production, fine, cool, I'll do that.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize all this backstage opportunity until like recent years when I go and did Edinburgh Fringe, because I've always been involved with like music and like singing and art. When I tried and did drama GCSE, my teacher basically kicked me out because I never did drama before, because I grew up in Hong Kong. The theatre wasn't really a thing there, so I didn't have access to all that. So when I tried to join drama club, thinking that will be fun, and my teacher said you have no experience, so that's no. But I carry on with art on the side, just music, and then I did study math and computer science, but on the way I was just joining glee club and singing and doing like show choir stuff. So I already did a bit like of like production stuff and planning and different things on that, which I didn't even realize. It's until I got into London and started working, even though I was coding, but I was like basically either singing in a choir or working as usher in theatre. I just realized I just put myself in theatre all the time. It got to a point I'm like, I just want to see how theatre work. And my friend suggests, you should go to Edinburgh Fringe. I'm like, what is that? Just go and work and you'll see, you try it. So that's when I got hooked. So when I worked for Pleasant at Edinburgh Fringe 2 years ago. And then that's when I discovered, oh, what's this lighting desk? Oh, this sound desk looks fun. I'm like, I can program all these. This is easy programming for me. And I just got really hooked into like doing live performance and shows. So yeah, I did. So it's kind of like, all this is like I wasn't say new, but like it happened pre-pandemic. And I'm like, I want to get back to this as soon as possible. Yeah.
And how did you discover kind of the laser stuff you've been working on?
The laser stuff. So that's actually from Edinburgh Fringe as well. So I was in a venue. So we're doing the same show, same 10, 12 shows every day. And 2 of the show is Beck Hill's like comedy and Matt Parker like maths comedy, which is like very my kind of world. And they both of the show, they have a laser for it, and that's when I got access to see laser, and then basically followed and asked us and do some work for the same guy, Sebli Delayo, and see if he's got anything else, because I feel like that's a very niche and interesting branch. Like laser is it's a very dangerous work, because high power laser is dangerous. It could be blinding, it could be damaging, but that's when it's just really cool, get to work with laser and haze. And that's when I and over lockdown, he created this project called Laser Light City, where the idea is, because when social distancing was happening, like, no everyone can just like sit at home. The idea is everyone who can within the city, within the area, if you can see the laser, you can control it. You don't have to be in like packed with someone else or in a crowd or anything. So that project got born, and I was very lucky to work on that. So basically we did a few locations. We did Brighton as a trial, and then we did Leeds, and then we did Worthing, I think. So we just went and rigged like high power 30 watts laser on rooftops on Seaside Pavilion, and member get to control it. You can change the color, you can move what you want. So that was just really fun to work on that. And it's a very niche thing to get into, and it's definitely a very male dominated environment, more like electronics people or like DJs and festivals or kind of people. But I think that there is a gap there where we can have newer generation and more female worker to get like a different perspective on it. That will be great. That's the goal, to get more female laserists. That's my goal.
That's amazing, thank you. It's really interesting to hear about all the different routes that people have had in, because I feel like on every production I work on, everyone in the production team has come at it from a completely different way. Like Amy, I did some theatre at school, sort of realised in my teen years that I actually really didn't enjoy being on a stage with loads of people looking at me all the time, so tried to do some backstage bits and pieces, but it wasn't a huge thing at my school. So it was only really at university that I got into, sort of realised how wonderful lighting design was and how creative it could be, and got into it that way. But I always really enjoy hearing people's stories of like what sparked the kind of love for them. So thank you all very much. And so I think we have some people here today who are probably quite early on in their career, or like thinking about getting into the industry. And seeing as we have such a vast range of experience and also different routes in, we were wondering if we could ask you a bit about your top advice for people getting into the industry. What kind of your top tips would be for people just starting out or quite early on in their careers? What do they really need to know? Who would like to start us off?
I'll jump in if that's all right. All my work from quite early on has been through friends and connections, and my top tip is to just put yourself out there and meet as many people as possible in as many places as possible. Berta was saying earlier that there's loads of small theatres and fringe theatres in the UK, and we're really fortunate, and they're always looking for people who are passionate or interested, even if you don't know anything, but you've got an interest in it, they're always looking. So just, go to your nearest theatre, say hello at stage door, see if there's anything going, ushering or, stage hand or whatever. But also, just briefly skipping back to the previous point, I did a degree in this, but I don't think that it really stood me in great stead. I think I would have got just as much from going directly into the industry. So there's, so many routes to get to where you want to go. But really, my top tip is to meet as many people as possible.
Yes, the degree doesn't necessarily, I agree with the terms that the degree doesn't necessarily teach you the skills to do the job and all of that, because you get, yes, as much experience working, if not more. But having been in 3 different places, I think one of the things that the degree helps is what you were saying about making friends. I found that for me, the biggest struggle coming to London is that I had lost those connections that I had made in the States. Coming out of my degree, I was already working and I was already programming, because I had met people in uni and I have proven myself in my productions at uni. So I had that background to basically jump off. Whereas in London, even though I have my CV and I had my, credits, nobody had actually seen my work or worked with me or knew me as a person. And so I felt that my career kind of like went down a little bit and I had to rebuild it because I didn't had that background of knowing directors, knowing actors that are like one-man performance, people who will become stage managers and producers and all of those people that will eventually need somebody. And they're like, oh, who are you gonna call? And also, I think of that, keeping in mind that I think my advice is also understanding that production is not, it's very fun to turn on lights and you do amazing things and all of that, but it's also a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. So working with people that you like and you enjoy and that you can use each other to lift things up, right? To work together well, that you are a good team and all of that, it's very important. And finding those people and keeping in touch with them and, going to the pub after, I feel like it's equally important to make yourself sane, because otherwise you work long hours in a lot of stress, and productions have gone wrong because people are not, they're tired, they're stressed, they're not getting along, and the production suffers a lot. So I think university is important in that sense, that you can get those social backgrounds and the networking, and yeah, equally going into theaters and calling out and being like, I'm here, getting in touch with, in my case, the Association of Lighting Designers and Producers, and all those unions, all those networkings that exist helps a lot, I think. But yeah, totally agree with Lucy, just that tiny detail.
So for me, it's all about persistence and not giving up, because you're going to get rejected so many times because it is such a sought after industry. But for me and for my partner who works up at Sunderland Empire, lots of big theatres these days, particularly houses that receive touring shows, have such a small in-house staff. They need lots and lots of crew to make the shows work. So a good way of getting in is to find out what shows are coming. So say, for example, if We Will Rock You is out on tour or Mary Poppins is out on tour, about 3 or 4 weeks before the show comes into tech, send your CV off, nag the stage manager, nag the head of stage, because they're going to need 20, 30, 40 crew to put the show in. So it's all about timing and it's all about persistence. And yeah, a degree is useful, but not massively useful. I mean, mine's in media and television, because I thought I was going to obviously be the head of costume drama for the BBC by the time I was 24. But I ended up going into theatre instead. So my degree was useful to an extent because it meant I could prove to people that I was able to concentrate on a project for 3 years. But the other side of it is about people and persistence and timing. Those are my top tips.
I think echoing what everyone is saying, yeah, like lots of like local theaters, they all need like crews at different times. So keep asking them, go and see the show, and then see like who the stage manager are, like who designed the show, who's the sound engineer, and go and reach out to them as well if you're interested in doing more sound, or excuse me, if you're interested in doing more light, but also like the degree, because I didn't come from a degree which is relevant. So for me, it wasn't relevant, but where I built up my network, which is very important, like everyone was saying, I started that from Fringe. That's where I got my network. So I think you get that from doing a degree as well. You get experience doing all the hard, heavy work with everyone. You learn to work with everyone and support each other. So I guess it depends on like what stage of life you're at. If you're at a really early start and you're like, I really want to go into theatre, and it's a good place to be, because then you get to meet a lot of people who can like, make friends and lead you to a good career. But it's not the only route to get into it. Like if you can do hard work and you're persistent, and like you can make your way up as well.
And just following on from that, if you do a degree but it's not one in backstage theatre or production or whatever, it doesn't mean that you've ruled it out forever. I've got loads of friends who've done all sorts of different degrees, from archaeology to geography to engineering, and they are still professionals in the industry. So choosing a different degree now doesn't rule it out for you to be able to come and join the fun of backstage in the future.
There's so much focus when you're 18 to choose the degree that is going to set you up for the rest of your life. And newsflash, doesn't work like that. You know, just because you spend 3 years studying veterinary science or 7 years studying veterinary science doesn't mean that you have an epiphany at 26 when you go and see the local Amdrams do their show and you suddenly realize that's what's been missing from your life. So yeah, degrees are important, but they're not the be all and end all.
So we've had a question which I think follows on quite nicely from this discussion. And the question is, have any of the panel found practical skill qualifications useful? And I think what is meant by that is sort of non-higher education sort of skill qualifications, so that are offered by sort of governing qualifying organizations. So for example, one I know off the top of my head and that I considered doing early in my freelance career is the ABTT's technical theatre qualification. It has like a special name, and that's in 3 levels. That's a bronze, silver and gold, and you sort of have to pay to like do that, and they do it all over the country. So depending on where it is currently, you have to sort of go and travel there and stay there. So I think, Abby, you did a sound qualification, didn't you?
Well, I did a very brief training with Orbital Sound where Lucy worked, she mentioned. So basically I had a very short training just before Edinburgh Fringe start, just to give us a good idea, because everyone comes from different levels of theatre skills. So that was really, really useful. But I think that was a really short, intense course just before to get us started on Edinburgh Fringe. And that was useful for someone, you know, who doesn't really have an experience, to just try something short, something intense. But I think like, and the one that you mentioned, the ABTT award, like that was something that I've been considering as well. I think it's a little bit pricey, but there's a lot of skills that I do want to work on. But I do also figure like it's also something that I can learn on the job. There's a lot of things you get to learn on the job, even though when you're not trained to do it and you're not allowed to do it, but you get to watch other people doing it. By watching other people doing work, you learn a lot from watching it, and ask questions. If you want to know what it is or how it works, it's no harm asking questions. You get to learn a lot more, and people are willing to help you if you ask them, because then they know you're interested. So I think like it's both like if there's really some specific skills that you want to learn and you feel like that will lead to a job, then you can get a qualification. But I think for me right now, everything I'm just learning on the job.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's a sort of, it really just depends on like how much you value like that piece of paper that says, you know, this person has, you know, qualified or has been certified in this specific set of skills. And I know that some venues are more sort of choosy about who they take on. You know, some venues will, there's been a couple of venues that I've sort of worked at that have been more like, you need a sort of technical theatre qualification to work here, but most venues don't. Most venues just want people who are like keen and competent, and you know, have a sort of keen awareness and enthusiasm for sort of all the different aspects that make production work. As long as you know have an awareness for I think health and safety is possibly the exception to this rule, like going off and doing a course in sort of electrical fundamentals or COSH, which is basically how to handle paint and special effects liquids and stuff that can explode and can catch fire, manual handling, you know, first aid, all these are the things that are worth sort of investing your time and money in. But often if you are attached to a venue, they'll sometimes send their staff on courses. So at CPT, we were really lucky that we got some money from the Culture Recovery Fund specifically to spend on training. So we were able to send 3 or 4 of our casual technicians on a first aid course, a mental health first aid course, a BSL, introduction to BSL course. We also ran a sort of like anti-racism discussion group for the team. So it's also, if you, depending on how much you sort of flit around, and if you become like attached to a venue, there are often opportunities to like upskill and to actually develop your skills specifically. But generally speaking, unless, like Abby said, you're looking for like a very specific set of skills to do something specific, you can really learn them on the job generally. Hopefully that answers your question.
And from what Amy was saying, I had some on-the-job training as well when I was working with Legoland. I was working on a Paris Stunt show, just an operator cover. But basically, they gave us training on rope access, first aid, and height as well. So like I said, depends on what venue you're working on, you will be able to get some training and to get some proper qualification if you feel like that piece of paper would help you to get somewhere else.
Yes.
So a lot of manufacturers, if it's not something that you want to learn lots about, or you want to learn about a specific piece of kit, say you want to learn about a lighting desk, a lot of manufacturers offer free training courses that are really, really worthwhile. There are a couple of days, ETC, and there's loads more, and the same for sound as well. I will try and find some links and share.
Yeah, ETC and Grand MA, they both did, because over lockdown did some online training with them as well, just to get myself busy. So they also did like online training as well. So I think now that you can go back in person, it would be great to do it in person, but they also have online resources now where you can just kind of learn it at your own pace. So that might be something that's suitable for everyone. You can just work at home, but so you get options to be in person and working just on your computer and learning it.
Also, you can actually download a lot of the software that we use, like, so for example, the ETC, which is they're a manufacturer of lighting consoles and lighting equipment. You can download the show running software that you would find on a desk onto your laptop and play with it on there. Obviously, you're not going to be able to control actual lights, but you can actually sort of get a feel for the like interface and play with, you know, programming and stuff. And you can do that with lots of, like, you can do that with QLab, which is what a lot of venues use for sound and video and lighting. Again, free to download, won't take up loads of space on your computer, like, and you can just sort of play and just sort of see how you feel about it.
There's lots of YouTube tutorial linked to ETC console as well, so it might be something in a different way of learning as well if people prefer video and visual way of learning.
I had a completely different suggestion from, rather than these short courses, in Trinity Lab, and they have a graduate internship. So for a year, you get trained on stage as a technician. The people that we hired, and that you get paid and everything. And we usually used to get people straight out of university or with really low level, but a great interest. And then basically throughout the year, you work on every show that we have on stage. That might be a student show, but we also it's a dance conservatoire. So we all get dance stuff. But we had Wayne McGregor, we had Hofesh, we had Boys, Ballet Boys, and all of those great companies that they come and do tech week. So you get a lot of, you get to know designers, you get to know producers, you get to know creatives and everyone. And then by the end of the year, you're like properly trained, and a lot of people have gone to have, like, you know, there's just regular technicians and stuff like that. And I feel like courses like that might be the right. We had people this year, we had someone who was health inspector for restaurants, and suddenly he was like, oh, I had a bit of background, but suddenly I realized this is what I want to do. He doesn't want to be a designer, he wants to like program and make gadgets and stuff. So he'd been working with the pandemic, it's been like 2 years, but one of the graduate interns also goes on tour. So there's a lot of experience to gain there and connections. And I think those also are, you know, great skills, qualifications. I don't know what they get at the end of the year, but that is a great thing, I think, to learn a lot. My feeling about certificates is that it's, unless, like Amy was saying, unless it's a first aid or a telescope or an iPath, like, I don't think anybody's really looking into what your paper says, as long as you got the skills and you know what you're doing. And also on that note, when you're working in production and somebody's putting down a cable and they need help and you ask, can I help you? Even if you don't know what you're doing, you can ask questions, you can do things in the moment. And that's a great way to make friends and learn things and people, for some reason, people in this industry are super willing to teach everybody everything. So there's not grumpy old dudes being like, no, I'll do it myself. Everybody's like, yeah, sure, grab a cable, please, make my job easier. So those are also on-site, experiences that you can get.
And lastly, I guess Fringe, we should say Fringe. Top tip is Fringe will take everyone and anyone. There are loads of companies that you can go and work for. Pleasance, Underbelly, Assembly, Sea Venues, Greenside. I'm sure I've missed loads, but they're always looking in July and August. It's a really good way to go and get some experience. They will teach you pretty much everything that you need to know. You can have no experience and just be willing and eager to learn, and they will snap you up. And they start looking about March time each year for recruiting for the summer. So I would highly recommend getting involved in Fringe. It's where I met loads of great friends, lifetime friends, and colleagues now.
Great. All right, cool. Well, I think that's everyone's top tips. I think just to drop in my 2 cents, unconventional as I'm a co-host, but I think it's important that we all share our wisdom as people who work in the profession. It's a slightly more abstract. It's to be open-minded and sort of try things and take on things that scare you and that you think, oh my gosh, can I do this? But also know your worth. And I think as you sort of develop your skills and as you realize what you want to do specifically, what you want to specialize in and what your sort of favorite roles are, you can start to be, and this is a great feeling, you can start to be sort of more picky about the work that you take on. You can start to say no. And there's a lot of conversations in the industry around sort of pay and around working conditions. And, it's really important also, I think someone said before, about joining unions and joining sort of like groups that represent us, and because they, the BECTU are basically, I think, most of the reason why the government gave freelancers like support during the pandemic, because they didn't, when they announced the furlough scheme, there was nothing about self-employment, there was nothing about freelancers, and it was only the sort of constant work of the unions and the industry that put pressure on the government to do this. So that's really important, joining unions. But yes, to sort of know, if you sort of are offered work that might not pay as well as you might need it to or might expect to sort of weigh up whether taking work that is paid less than you might want it to be is worth doing anyway, because it offers you the opportunity to like learn new skills and network and meet new people, but also to sort of just have this constant awareness of that. It's difficult because you saying yes to work that isn't paid well, it contributes to like a culture of work not being paid well. So it's a very difficult thing for me to say, like, oh, take work that isn't paid well. But sometimes I think it's contextual, like if it's friends, if it's people that if it's contacts that you have who are just sort of self-funding, putting on a show, doing a Fringe thing, and like might not have funding from the Arts Council or private funding to like pay everyone loads and loads of money, you can sort of like make those decisions on like a person, a case-by-case basis. But I think it's important to have a general sense of like what you expect, the kind of like working conditions that you expect, the kind of benefits that you expect. And if you're not being paid really, really well, what else are you going to get out of it? Like, is there other things? So yes, anyway, that's just my take. So I think now we can move on to the sort of main discussion point for this, the theme of this panel, which is about sort of diversity in the industry and accessibility and inclusivity. And I think we'd like to start this discussion, which I think is going to take us to the end of the panel, by talking about sort of the challenges we faced as being sort of female identifying or non-binary people working in the industry, and how that has changed as it's sort of progressed, as we've progressed in our careers. I will open this out. I'm sure everyone has lots to say.
I'll jump in if I can. So I kind of get the feeling I'm a bit older than maybe some of the other people on the panel, because my working career started in 1993. So a lot of the men that I was working with were proper old guard. They'd worked in theatre through the 1970s, 80s and 90s. Women were an abomination on stage and they shouldn't be allowed, and it was a tough industry to break into. I mean, luckily now, most of those are now retiring or have retired, and the people who came after them are much more open to sharing and inclusivity, and even just basic things like making sure that there's enough female toilets or enough non-binary toilets, there's enough changing spaces, you know, that just the basics. I mean, the amount of crew rooms, I can see Lucy nodding, but the amount of crew rooms that you go into that have no female facilities, because they are just used to the last 100 years of it being completely male dominated. So yeah, the old guard are moving on, and there is hope for you, for the next generation coming through, that people will be able to learn and be inclusive. And we fought battles so that you guys don't have to, and it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, just simple things like going, like Anna was saying, going to an event space and they've only opened the male toilets rather than the female toilets as well, because they're not expecting any females on the crew. Thankfully things are changing and we're really seeing a difference, and the understanding of our colleagues is also really important, to make sure that, you know, people are well educated on how to be inclusive and having those conversations, those open conversations with everybody. It's not just, you know, women standing up for women or non-binary. It's about including your male colleagues in the conversation, making them feel welcome in that world, and not trying to alienate them, but trying to work together to achieve the end goal, in my opinion.
I had because I worked, well, when I started, I did a short, like 2-year training, professional formation in camera operator. So I immediately went into internship in television, and I was working in Madrid as an electrician first, and then camera assistant, and then electrician. As a camera assistant, there were 2 other women with me, so it was kind of okay. On the electrician side, it was the first time that, well, it wasn't the first time that a man was telling me don't touch this, but it was the first time that I was constantly battling my way through it, and having to constantly be proving myself for a job that I already had. And that was because in cinema they use these massive balas, they're like heavy, and then you have to carry them around and everything. And I know my strengths, and I know that I cannot carry a ballast like 5 kilometers from where the track is, but I know that I can lift a 5K light, which is also a massive light, but I'm also much stronger than I look. And so having to be like unloading a truck, and then having to, the guys being like, oh, don't worry, I'll do it. I'll be like, thank you. I will let you know when I cannot do it, but right now we need to unload this truck and it's my job to do it. So I'm not gonna sit around and do it. And seeing that, and that was in 2009. And then I went to the States in San Francisco, which the environment obviously is completely different. And in theater, it's like an explosion of be who you whatever and however and whatever. And the only rule was like, don't wear a skirt and don't go up a ladder if you're wearing a skirt. And that's the only thing that you have to really be mindful of, and for obvious reasons, such as health and safety. And then, you know, theater and in San Francisco, it was a great environment. And then coming to London, my first job was with a crew called Show Force. And it's basically people who are hired to take down or put up the like sets and barriers and whatever is the heavy lifting before and after a show. So I was working with a bunch of lads, and you know, when I say lads, everybody knows what I'm talking about. That's what it was. Keeping in mind that I came from San Francisco, I didn't know anybody or anything, and there were all these guys, same thing, telling me to not unload trucks and to not do these things and to not do the job. And the thing is, they weren't like physically, most of them, they were the same size as me. They weren't very big guys. And having that constant battle with them was extremely annoying. and having to prove yourself, it came to a point where I was like, you know what, there's no point of me fighting this. There's no point of me fighting to carry more things. That's just absurd. If you want to carry all this stuff, please go ahead. I'll carry the lightweight. That's all right. I'll give up. But I feel like that kind of, this constant growing up and having to battle your way through it, it transfers when you go into a theater and you have a new crew, when you're meeting people for the first time. And I had that where I have worked with other women that were trying to prove themselves equally hard against me. And I feel like it becomes a bit of a fight between us. I'm not like, I have to be aware of being like, I don't need to engage on this, but I think it's because it's just where you're used to it. You just go to a venue and you're ready with your, you know, your skills, and you're proving yourself and people telling you off and all these things, that when you suddenly meet other people who are in the same circumstances, then it becomes a bit like, oh, I need to do this. And I don't know if it's just very intense women, or if it's just, that's my feeling is that just because that's what we're used to doing, and that having to prove ourselves 3 times harder. And I feel like that's,
I think female crew need to support each other rather than compete with each other. Female crew, we need to support one another,
exactly,
rather than compete with each other.
Understanding that we can, you know, that we need to back off of that, and understanding that we're all in these, like, we feel the struggle, and I know what they're trying to do, and I know what they're trying. And I feel also supporting people who are in managing positions, because there's a lot, I feel like there's more and more techs in lighting mainly. Lucy, I applaud you, because it's the first sound engineer that I've met that was female. Usually designers are female, but not necessarily engineers. And I feel like crew heads, technical managers, and all of the head of lighting, because technical managers I have seen, but the head of lighting, I only know the people at Hampstead Theatre and the people at Trinity Laban. But it's rare that you have those heads of production that are female as well. And I think that becomes a challenge as well, because you're managing men, and there's an intrinsic society thing that we're all, like, in general, just going through it as well, of learning and working through it and supporting those people and supporting those roles. I think it's really important, and understanding, but like, whoa, we need to back off each other's backs. You know, we're not competing against anything. We don't have to prove to each other. We know what we're up against. And I think that's also really important. Still happening now. Yes, things are changing, but it's still happening.
Fairness as well. Yeah, fairness is really important. If everybody gets an equal opportunity to achieve what the end game is, then everyone will benefit. Everybody's skills will improve. Everybody's attitudes will improve, and the world will be a better place if we all look after each other just that little bit more. But just to scoot back on one point, when I first applied to Glyndebourne, I wasn't going to take the job because my interview was so awful. I got asked in the interview if my CV and experience was actually mine because it was too good to be a woman's. I got asked if it was my boyfriend's CV that I'd applied for the job with. I got asked in the interview if I knew what a battery operated screw gun was for. I got asked what I would do if I couldn't lift anything. And I was like, well, if I need help, I will ask. It was a very, very old-fashioned attitude, to the point where I had to bite my tongue and stop being sarcastic in my responses. So the dinosaurs are still out there, but they are retiring. So keep the faith, ladies.
How did you deal with that on a day-to-day level? Because that must have been exhausting to constantly be fighting that.
Yeah, I mean, I called myself a professional tomboy, was how I competed against it. So my hair was always up, my t-shirts were always high necked, my shorts were always long. So I became reasonably androgynous, and I became very, very mouthy. I swore like an absolute trooper, just to stand up for myself. And every night I would come home and burst into tears. And that lasted for about the first 8 weeks or so of the summer season. And then by about week 9, they realised I wasn't going away. It didn't matter what they said or how they treated me. I was still turning up for work. I was still working hard. I was still part of the team. I would ask when I got stuck, because some of the scenery is steel, so it's incredibly heavy. And it was just a case, but it is like exhausting proving yourself every day. And bearing in mind, I wasn't going to take the job. Obviously, I needed the job because I needed money. We all have to eat. So, and then I was there for 5 years. So I certainly nudged my way in. And when I started off with 39 men who didn't know what to do with me, I left having gained 39 brothers who looked out for me. So it was worth the fight. But that initial 2 months, my God, I was so tired. I was so tired.
Do you think their attitudes changed, the 39 men that you worked with?
Yeah, they did. It was slow. I mean, they started off by thinking that perhaps I was only there to meet, to make a boyfriend or to sleep around, or, you know, that they thought I had all these hidden agendas. And I didn't. I just loved theatre. And to be honest, when I got there, I knew nothing about opera. For anyone who doesn't know, Glyndebourne is a big opera company. And I knew nothing about opera, but I knew theatre. And so I knew how the mechanics worked. I knew how the shows went together. And it was that experience that saw me through, as they realised that I wasn't going to sleep around. I wasn't going to wear inappropriate clothing. I wasn't going to call people out every 2 minutes. But I did become quite tomboy-like and quite hard-nosed for a while. But after about year 2, I could relax a bit. And through them, I've made so many other connections and worked for so many other brilliant companies. So it was worth the fight. But initially, it was a fight.
Yeah, when I first started at Orbital on the hire desk, I was taking calls and people would, on several occasions, is there a man I could speak to about this? Like questioning my technical knowledge. And you just had to be polite and really like suck it up. And I hated that because it fought against everything that I had battled so hard to get to where I was. But I have to say, I'm now in another hire company as head of audio, and that isn't happening anymore. We've got to a point where those conversations are no longer, even if people think it, they're no longer allowed to say it, which I think is proving that we're going in the right direction. But my bosses sometimes don't know what to do with me because I'm a mouthy female. I'm the only technical female at my level in the company of 120 people that I work for. And there isn't anybody in the rest of the company that's looking like they're following. No other females. There's a few warehouse people, but I really would like to move towards building platforms for women to feel that there is a true career opportunity. It's not just a job. It's not something that they can do for a few years in their 20s. There really is a career that we can offer in this, because I think that's certainly what I was looking for when I was going through my degree. I was looking for a career opportunity. I wanted something that I could really like knuckle down and get on with. And I think some of my male counterparts aren't so bothered about the career. They just really enjoy the job. Whereas I think for me, it was finding a path that I could follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but it is that exhausting. It is exhausting. And I think, yes, you're right. The last 5-10 years, there has been more of a sea change where people do know that they have to be quiet and they have to be respectful. And the chances are you do know more than they do. But no, I think you've done so well,
Thank you.
to get where you are.
We all have teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely. And supporting each other.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that exhaustion you talk about is really interesting. I'm sure it's something that we've all felt, where I quite often turn up at a venue as the lighting designer and people look really surprised when I introduce myself, or they don't think that, they're sort of like, oh, and they don't think that I'll know anything technical at all. And for me, I often feel like having to battle with that means that the work I then produce it's either harder to make it or it's compromised, because in the back of my head I'm sort of thinking, oh god, if I press the wrong button on the programming desk, they're going to think that I don't know what I'm doing, rather than because I've just hit the wrong button in a moment of really speedy programming. And so I feel like one of the biggest benefits of making our industry more diverse and more welcoming to everyone is kind of letting everyone do their best work, and the work that we do will increase. But we were, I'm interested to know kind of what, I mean, the benefits are very obvious, but kind of what you guys think the kind of key motivations and the biggest changes and like rewards that we would reap from diversifying the industry would be.
In the industry, it'd just be healthier. You know, it would just be so much healthier. And it would get rid of a lot of ego and disrespect, because in male-dominated crews, there's an awful lot of ego, and it just levels the playing field. You know, it just makes it a fair and nicer environment to work in.
And then everyone don't have to feel like they need to be constantly proving that they know the job or their worth. Like, then you're actually focusing on doing the best job that you can, rather than like worrying about other things that you shouldn't be focusing on, really. And like being supportive, like it'll be much more of a teamwork, and it feels like a good team, and everyone will enjoy it a lot more as well.
I think it's a strange question, and I feel that every time I have to fill out an equal opportunity, because I feel the question is why we're not diversifying the industry. The world is diverse. Why is it not the industry? You know, it's not like, why are we keeping this path exclusive? Why aren't we, you know, and it is an active side of making opportunities available to the people who don't have them. But I think the active part is reverse. We're actively keeping it exclusive. So why don't we stop that? Why don't we stop the exclusivity of the industry? And I think that obviously has benefits, because we're actively keeping things away from people. It's never been a good thing. So I think having that mentality of, you know, let everybody do their thing and reach out to everyone, and that I think it's important keys aspects of this, you know.
Being a cynical feminist, being a completely cynical feminist, is old white man syndrome. You know, old white men have ruled a lot of industries for a long time, and they're frightened that if they share it, they will get a smaller slice of the cake. Well, they will, but to the benefit of everybody else. It's not all about them.
Not necessarily, will they? Because it's not about taking anything away from anyone. And you know, what we're talking about, don't know, there was a comment before. My feeling is that the industry is big enough for everyone. We're not taking anything away from anybody, because we just said, like, during the last half hour, that there's so many opportunities everywhere and so many places that need people. And now every venue I go to, as things are opening up, and I think it might be a key moment for these feminism and diversity moment, is that a lot of people through pandemic have switched careers or retired or decided to do something else. And apparently there's a lot of gaps. Everybody's been telling me my work hasn't changed much in terms of quantity. So I don't know if that's just because of that or just because of the opportunities that I get. But now there's a moment that a lot of the industry has switched. So there's a lot of gaps to fill. So even more opportunities for everyone. And if those opportunities get filled up, there's going to be another production, there's going to be another company, there's going to be another venue, there's going to be another thing where people can go to. So I think it's more about why aren't these people already here? You know, what's wrong with this system that it's not allowing these people to come in? And I spoke to a lighting designer called Jay Moragia, I'm gonna say, and he was saying that he struggled to get, he came from rather Central, one of those, and he said, well, I'm not gonna say the comments that they said during his interview, because it's mind-blowing, but he said that he didn't have a fair background coming into that. And I was a bit surprised, because he's grown up in London, so I was a bit like, why not, you know? And we never got to that part of the conversation, but I think that's where it needs to be.
I think there's an equal number of people coming in my experience. It's retaining those people. That's what we need to be looking at. How do we hold on to an equal number, and rather than people decide that the industry isn't for them, or that they could go and do something different that would have an easier life? What is it that we need to do to change to make it more of a real possibility for people to stick with it?
And just to jump off from that, we'd love to hear your suggestions about kind of the active steps that first maybe like organizations, venues, big producers, the people who really hold the power in a structural way could take to make production environments feel like a safer, more welcoming, and kind of a place that female identifying, non-binary, and also people who don't identify as white might want to stick around and feel like they could actually build a career. Kind of what suggestions would you give for people for those organizations to be doing, or what things do you know people are doing already that you think are really positive?
I think colourblind casting, so starting on stage and bringing it backwards. So colourblind casting is a fantastic thing, especially in typically white Western arenas such as Shakespeare, because of course Shakespeare's brilliant. You can do anything with it, and then a lot of that then transfers backstage. And again, back to like I was saying to Lucy earlier, just toilets, just get the basics right. As soon as somebody feels welcome, they know that they can hang their mug on a shelf, they can go to the loo in safety, they can get changed in safety, and there's somewhere that they can go where they know that they will be accepted, rather than being thrown into that all-male arena and trying to work out how to use a urinal. It's get the basics right, and I think everything else will follow. And then when it comes to programming, putting on shows that will attract a more diverse audience, and then those audiences will realize that those shows are within their grasp, that it is something that they want to be involved with, and hopefully it will all just be a catalyst and spread it and bring more people in.
I think sorry.
I was say it is funny because theatre has a reputation of being accepting and letting people be who they want to be, and here we are sitting here going, well, for the last however long it hasn't been, and we still need to smash those walls down. But so yeah, I suppose that's the opposition that we face all the time.
What I was gonna say is that I think that's one of the things that Bernie Grant Center does pretty well, which is to get that diversity on stage. They're still working a lot on how do we get the backstage also to be diverse. And I think you're right. I think putting on shows and showing people that, we can do, you can have the arts can be for everyone, and not just this specific venue for this community and this specific thing for these people, everybody everywhere. Does help with that. And things with like stage side and which I found out it's not as popular as I thought it would be, but I don't know if people know a stage side. It's basically a network to make that more visible, to represent everyone and share and make everyone connect to those other levels, basically make the connections between everyone. And actively being aware of those things. I think one of the things that for me stands out a lot is that when I worked at Trinity Lab, and they had one of the 2 years in a row, they had graduate interns in the AV department. Basically, they film all the performances and also all the students' assessments and stuff. And they work quite closely with staff and teachers and stuff. And the 2 years in a row, they hired people who go by they, but they look male, but they dress whatever in, I guess, classic female clothes sometimes, classic male sometimes, whatever. And a lot of staff, having conversations with them in a technical note, they were like, oh, I struggle a lot to use the they pronoun and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, well, make an effort, like, why is that a thing? Why are you commenting this to me? And, oh, you're so good using the they. To personally, it's a lot more comfortable to call people they, and then you don't make a mistake. But having that normalcy, making it, like you were saying, basics, integrating those things and understanding that, that diversity exists, and that things are not, it's not, your sound engineer is not always going to be the sound guy. Stop calling the sound guy. It's just not a thing. And yeah, your line designers are going to be female or male or nothing, or just, it also goes in hand with the society though. So that's the thing, that it's the biggest. We're not going to change society from backstage, but helping on those conversations and normaling those conversations. And if there's no female toilet, just like make a point of it. I'm going to take this stall, and this stall is going to be the female toilet or something. Luckily, I've never had the chance. I never had the circumstances, but I also feel like people, because we're having these conversations in person, I feel like people, I don't realize I'm in an all-male crew until it becomes very aware, because somebody makes a comment and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't said that in front of you. Okay. And having also unconscious bias workshops, I feel like that's the most sacred thing. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and yeah, we're advancing a lot, and basics are really necessary.
I think what you say about language is really something that management can do so much better across the board, is to educate people, because maybe the problem we're having is that people don't know how to use the language that we're asking them to move on to, and they've never been taught. They've just picked it up from conversations, and actually maybe we need to do a much more structured, this is why, and this is how to talk to people of all diversities, and go back to educate the people who are probably the ones kicking up a fuss because they're nervous of getting it wrong, and therefore they're acting against it. We're all there at school, the kid that acted out was probably the one who was just most anxious about getting it wrong. So maybe it's about management and productions providing training opportunities and opening that discussion really early on as to how they would like you to proceed in terms of language.
Yeah, clear rules and sort of boundaries, policies, clear sort of procedures for when things don't go as planned, like, making things sort of fair, and never assuming that someone's mistake is malicious or intended to cause harm, like having sort of open and honest communication. That feels like a good step to segue into. So it's sort of the same question, but from a slightly different perspective. We want to know what you think of what our sort of cis male and white counterparts can do in the sort of everyday working environments to do the same, to achieve the same thing, to sort of make the industry more welcoming and inclusive. So I suppose advice. If a man was to come up to you and say, well, what can I do? What is my place in this whole process? And this is improving things. What can they do?
Oh God, just to be our champion, just to stand up for us and to question anything you hear that is out of order. The easiest way, I don't know if anybody's noticed this with trolls that pop up on social media, the easiest way to blow up a troll is to just keep asking why. It's like
public shaming.
Why did you say that? What do you mean by that? And it's not being aggressive, and it's not even joining in the argument. It's just continually asking them to explain themselves, and very often they can't. So like, why were you sexist towards Anna? Well, she's a woman. Well, what does that mean? Well, she's what does that? Well, yeah, and you get two sentences in and they can't get any further. So it's the he for she. It's getting the male feminists and the male anti-sexist, the pro-diversity, you're just questioning the dinosaurs when you hear them, because it'll all fall apart.
I think there's also in general in life, treating people differently. You're not making anybody any favors for treating them differently. I have a lot of people, especially male white people, that are like so scared about getting it wrong. And I'm like, that's exactly the point. You're overthinking it. You're not talking to people the same way that you'll be talking, like I said with the joke, for example. Why wouldn't you make a joke you know, if it's a sexist joke, then you shouldn't be making it. And if it's, you know, if it's rude, and if it's not a sexist joke, then, you know, if it's a dirty joke and they're all guys and then there's me, why wouldn't you make it? You know, I can laugh at dirty jokes. Like, I'm not a princess. I'm not like offended by things because of my gender. It's just, and I feel like having that constant thinking of like, oh no, I'm a feminist because I treat women with respect and with no, the fact that you're thinking and you're putting women in a group and you're treating them differently than every other male colleague that you must have, that's what makes it a problem, and that's what makes it persistently creating those devices. And the same goes with people of different color, people of different identities, people of different whatever. I'm all for erasing labels, you know, like we're all the same. We all live from, like, also at the same time, we're all individuals. We all come from different circumstances. So we're all going to react very differently to everything. Intersectionality. So just let go of all of those things, you know, just treat people with respect, people equally, be friends with everyone, and then definitely question the bigots and question why would you even think like that. And that is true, Anna, what you're saying is that really works. Just people pointing it out, and then they understand themselves as well where they went wrong, which is also, I feel like it's a big thing where people feel like a lot of male white people that I talk to are scared that suddenly what they were doing is wrong, and they're constantly being afraid of being wrong and being attacked for being wrong without understanding exactly where all of that is coming from. And posing those questions as well, why and stuff helps, and being like, just don't make any special circumstances unless they need to, and that you're requested for by the person who needs them.
I have a question. So my partner Sam, he is a lighting designer, production electrician, and he asked me, he said, I don't know whether I should continue in this industry because I want to make space for other people of other diversities, but also I love this industry and I want to keep going. What do I do? Do I stick with it, and how do I make space and still do still try and have a career? And I wanted to get other people's thoughts on that, because I didn't really know what to say, in all honesty. Sorry, Anna, say that again.
Is he able to employ anyone?
He does regularly, and he has a really diverse group of people that he works with. So
I guess that is the beginning of the journey, isn't it? Him taking people on, giving them a chance, then being a referee and part of their network, so that, you know, if people are unsure of their skill base, then he has that backup. He's got their backs, essentially, which eventually they won't need. But as a jumping off point, it just employs many different types of people, as long as they, you know, it's like I think we still need a meritocracy. You know, you still need to be good at your job. You shouldn't just get a job because you're different, because then chaos could reign, you know. But yeah, as long as, yeah, I think if he employs people who are good at their job and they are diverse as well, then yes, it will be a great thing.
That's basically what I said, but I wondered if anyone had any other thoughts on the matter.
Also, using your skills and your sort of experience to sort of help others, not necessarily in like an employment context, but also like if you know someone who if you know someone who's interested in a career, who like doesn't know quite like the right pathway to take or whatever, sort of getting into stuff like mentoring and skill sharing and that kind of thing, once you sort of have like a strong foothold in the industry, whether that's like individually or as part of a venue, is a really powerful way to sort of bring people in and sort of and let people have access who wouldn't necessarily otherwise have access.
I guess that goes for everybody, doesn't it?
It does. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Also, like I said, the industry is big enough for everyone. Nobody needs to step down. If he's good at his job, he's not going to do any favors by losing him, you know. So yeah, encouraging other people, and there's going to be, and especially if he is in a position to mentor and to help people out, then definitely stay.
Yeah, he'll be a good position to bring a more diverse group if you want, because, you know, and he can help them technical skills wise or just from a mental perspective as well. So he shouldn't step down doing what he loved. He should be sharing that this is why he's doing it, and get more people from everyone everywhere to do it.
Which brings me on to my second question, is this sort of ties into it about quotas, because I've come across this quite a lot recently, companies putting quotas on their hiring, on diversity quotas on their hiring. Is that a positive thing, do we think? Is that something that we should be encouraging? I worry that it puts people in a really difficult position where they may be asked to do more than they are qualified to do, because they were the only diverse person to apply for that job, and therefore they're being asked to step into a role that they're not necessarily ready for because they're trying to fill these quotas, rather than, like Anna was saying, about meritocracy, about being the right person for that job.
I'm all for hiring, looking at CVs without names, without addresses or all of that, so you can just see what the people's skills are and the background that they are, and cover letter, so they explain who they are as themselves, and then you have an interview to meet people. Because I was told when I moved to the States, my thing with race, it's very strange, because back home I'm white, but then everywhere else in the world I'm not. And when I went to the States, everybody wanted to make excuse for me to not being white or whatever, and everybody told me to put down on paper that I was Hispanic. There's a whole thing with it because I'm Catalan, but my biggest thing is like, why are we constantly questioning, like, and I came to England and people start asking about my sex life, like, do you like in those forms, and then if my body matches my gender, and like, what kind of questions are that? Why this is not, personally, I feel like this is not the way to go. I don't think that filling out quotas helps anyone. I don't think that's what they were trying to do between male and female and all of that. I think it helps promote diversity, and for industries to look for in places that they might not, because, so I understand the intentions of it, but I feel like the more we go into it, the more separate labels we're creating and the more problems we're actually making, rather than let's not get it, like, let's eliminate that. Your identification in your personal life and all of that is yours. Same with my race and my ethnicity and all of those things. Like, why does those things, my question is, why does that matter for my job? Doesn't matter, then don't ask the question. I prefer not to say. And I think that there needs to be, and then you put your points of how you hire people and why you hire those people, and you have to justify your answer. And I think that's what helps. And also I think it helps diversifying where you're advertising and where you are looking for. I think the basis comes of how we're reaching out for people to get them to those places and to keep them and all of that. I had someone at work at Bernie Grant. Obviously, Bernie Grant Center makes an effort to hire people who are from a Black background, and someone who was mixed race. For the longest time, she thought that she got the job because she was mixed race, because she wasn't super ready. Like, the job, the circumstance you're talking about, the job required more of her than what she knew, and she was like, I'm not sure that I should have gotten the job. And I often wonder if it's because I'm mixed race, and I feel like that makes us much damage, doesn't it? Like, you don't want to be hired because of how you look, or who, it's like, do you want to get the job because you're a white male? You want to get the job because you're good for the job, and it doesn't make everybody wish there was something else so they would get hired for that job. So my personal feeling is to go the other way around, to take those things out, so that, and then take the names and all those things that will give clues to what the people are, background, so that people don't make those calls. Because I have been on the other side where I'm not hired because I'm not a man, or not considered because I'm not a man, and all of those things.
I'm sorry to jump in on such an interesting discussion, but I'm just aware that we have reached 12:30, so I just would like to say to any of our attendees and panelists that if you need to run off, please feel free to. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A which I'd love to get an answer from. If anyone is able to stick around, they should be quite quick. So the first of those is, what is the most important contact you've made that has led to this point in your career? I can kick off while people are thinking. So I would say that the most important contact I think I made was through the Association of Lighting Production and Design. I applied to this amazing scheme that they run called the Luminaries scheme, which is where you for their design strand of it, you go and you be an assistant designer to 6 different lighting designers over the course of 6 months, which is obviously an amazing opportunity. I applied and I got an interview, and even though I didn't actually end up getting the kind of post in the end, I met the head of the association called Jo Town, who offered me to come along and shadow her on a couple of shows afterwards. And she is absolutely lovely and wonderful, and it's from those shows that I really got a foothold in kind of less fringe and slightly more mid-scale and larger venues, and I met people that I'm still working with today. So that was a really lovely instance of meeting someone who turned out to be very important. So I don't know who would like to go next. If anyone has thoughts?
For me, it's companies rather than people. So I was really fortunate to work for the Royal Shakespeare Company for such a long time, and as soon as you put the RSC on your CV, it just leads on to so many other things. The staff turnaround there is quite quick, so it wouldn't necessarily be an individual, but that company was certainly an amazing springboard into other venues.
Yeah, for me, like the company Pleasance back in Edinburgh Fringe, that's what, it's not just one contact, it's a range of people from different type of show, different kind of production that you get to meet on, and you just follow them and, you know, get to do different kind of works. Yeah.
Cool. Lucy or Berta, would you like to jump in? And if not, then that's totally fine.
I'm just trying to think, because I feel like I have 2 different worlds, the technical and the design one. And design wise, I've worked with several companies out of doing tech work, and the tech work I've got because I applied to venues. But I have to say that definitely the Lumiere scheme, it's an amazing opportunity, which I had a similar situation. I applied, I didn't get to do it. I applied a second time. The first time I met Catherine Williams, who is also part of the ALD, and she does a lot of like smaller, I mean, she does big scale, but she also does a lot of fringe projects and a lot of projects that are experimental and new and stuff. And she got me in touch with a lot of people, and through applying the second time and talking with her and everything, I got to shadow David Howe, on his panto in Hackney Empire. And I have also shadowed Lucy Carter and Lee Kerr, and I feel like it hasn't necessarily changed my career in terms of lighting design and opportunities, but definitely has changed my designs and how I understand the creation process, or the way that I go into it and how I think about it. And having conversations with these people, creative conversations, it's like, to me, it's mind blowing. I also like lighting design. For me, is like something that I feel with passion. So just having that, maybe it's just, yeah, maybe it's a good connection. Think about it. Yeah, connections like those people really changed my creative side, and that, yeah, very grateful for that, if that counts.
And for me, again, a company thing, but I have been for years involved in the National Student Drama Festival, and that's a real network of people that I have come to rely on as colleagues, but also as a real like sounding board. If I've got a problem, they're my backbone that I go to when I need to, you know, ask a question, or if I've got a technical problem, or if I'm in a really strange environment and I just want some reassurance about the right thing to do. That was really the thing that really held me together, especially in the younger years.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, last question, and this is like a fun one to end. So can you share any bloopers or mistakes that you've made during programming of a show that somehow worked really well, even though it was a mistake, otherwise known as a happy accident? So I'll jump in with one. I did a Fringe festival, not Fringe festival, a tiny little theatre festival at the Barons Court Theatre a couple of years ago. Tiny little theatre, and the tech position sort of like this awkward, like sort of diagonal from the stage, so you sort of can't always see the stage. It's also really, really small. It's really sort of old, beat up equipment. Hopefully they've managed to like spend some money on it since I worked there. And it wasn't a lighting desk I was familiar with. It was like a really old Strand desk, very much like an analog kind of setup. And I was working on a sort of sketch comedy show. And right at the end of the show, there was a snap blackout at the end. And there was, I think it was like a family argument, but it was funny, blah, blah, blah. And I was hovering over the go button to do the last cue, because it was sort of like this, bang, end of the show. And my hand just like spasmed. And I just hit the go button, and this blackout happened like after, it was like the second last line of the like penultimate line of the show. And it was sort of like a punchline, and I sort of did the blackout, and then I panicked, and I was like, oh my god. And so I went back, and then they did the last line of the show, but everyone found it so funny, and I apologized afterwards, and they were like, no, it went really, really well, like everyone loved it, it was hilarious. Thankfully they were like very chill about it. But yeah, so that's me.
I haven't got a blooper exactly, but luckily it all turned out well. We were doing a live stream recently, and at the end of the live stream, all the mics come down and everyone starts talking about the gig, and somebody, I don't know who it was, managed to nudge one of the faders up, and so one of the mics goes back live to the stream, and thankfully they were saying how well the event had gone and how happy they were to be a part of it, rather than slagging it off and saying, God, how awful was that. But it could have been much worse than it was.
Yeah, I did. I worked on a press night once when I was at Stratford, and it had been a really hectic last rehearsal, trying to get everything through ready for press night. And about 10 minutes into the show, we could hear a radio that was live. Someone's belt pack had been left on stage, and it hadn't, because it was on the stage floor was a painted area, and then it was black off into the wings. And of course, a black belt pack wasn't necessarily spotted on a black floor, and so you could hear all the stage elects chatting to each other, going, have you got this cue lined up, and did you change those gels, and blah 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 blah, for like the first 20 minutes of the show until we found it. And then one of the ushers just had to sneak down the side of the auditorium and just kind of get rid of it as soon as she could. But yeah, that was press night. That was hysterical.
I had a small incident with like a hazer. I don't know, we changed something on the lighting test or something during the show. We were supposed to have just a little haze to get to see the laser, but the hazer was blowing full blast, like the whole room is filled with haze. And because I was on the control desk, and the only way to turn it off while I'm trying to still run the show, I need to actually turn it off right at the hazer. So I need to sneak back at backstage, climb behind the tap, turn the haze off. But luckily, like the show, like Matt Parker, he just turned it into like, this is great atmosphere, this is what I needed, and then just turn it into his show. But like it was quite daunting to trying to operate and also turn on the show and run back enough to operate for the next cue and keep it going.
I had it once when I was programming a dance show, and obviously for dance there's no set or anything, so it's mostly lights and effects that you can do with lights. And there was this moment that I was trying to do something cool and have a soft flashing lights and moving and stuff, and typing in the numbers, and you're concentrating and everything, and then I typing the wrong rate, which meant that the lights were going softly. It was like strobing party thing. And I was like, oh my God, wait a second, because the dancers are trying to do their movement and everything is like strobe light. And then the director, the choreographer goes, woo! I was like, totally meant to do that. Yeah, this is amazing. This is what I'm gonna go for. Obviously tone it down a little bit, but yeah, that was a very happy mistake.
You inspired them. You helped their process. Well, that's great. Katja, do you have one that you want to share before?
Just quickly, I had a similar thing at a show I was programming where it was like a transition between lighting cues, and it happened to happen along the same time as like an aeroplane sound effect, and they were like watching this aeroplane pass overhead, and something in the up and down time of the lights made it go dark on their faces as like a passing shadow.
Wow.
And I have absolutely no idea how I did it. Don't think I could do it again, but it looked really cool, and I was like, great, I will be keeping this in, I will not be touching it.
Amazing. One of those one-time things.
Yeah, one time only.
Great. Well, that feels like a good place to end this amazing conversation, or not end it, but sort of temporarily stop it. Thank you to everyone for attending, and also to the panelists for staying a little bit later to share some more stories. And we really want this conversation to continue. As I said, this shouldn't be the end of the conversation, and to carry on sort of hearing people's thoughts, which you can do either by sort of getting in touch with Jen. The email address I gave before was creativenetwork@alexandrapalace.com. But I'd also love to share my email for anyone my work email, which you can email any thoughts or questions. And that is Amy, AMY, @cptheatre.co.uk. And I think Katja is going to post it in the chat, maybe. That's what I think she's trying to do. But yes, do sort of stay in touch, and recommend that if you know anyone who wasn't able to make the webinar, it's being recorded, and so you can access it, and hopefully that will be accessible on the Ali Pali website. So yes, thank you to all our amazing panelists, Anna, Lucy, Abby, Berta. Thank you to Katja for being such an amazing co-host. Thank you to Jen for making this happen and being such an amazing support along the way, and doing all of the less fun logistical things. It's been amazing having this conversation, amazing to share stories, and gives us all a little bit of hope to take into the bank holiday weekend. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.